Surrey Islamic Society welcomes you all to the first talk of our Islamic Awareness Week 2011. Discover the religion of over 1.5 billion people.
So why did we choose tonight's topic, the purpose of life? A question many of us has questioned throughout our lives. But why is it that when we ask such a question, we receive so many different responses? If we were asked, why do we eat? In one way or another, we would all answer for nutrition, for survival. But tonight's question is much more crucial than the purpose of anything else we do. Tonight's question is questioning the purpose of survival itself. Also, why is it that so many of us are afraid to ask or tackle such a question? How is it that we are all so busy with our lives that we do not take the time to reflect and ponder on the actual purpose of our own existence? Is the problem with the question or the answer? We know that the answer to this question could change our lives indelibly, and we as a human race are aversion to change. Tonight's speaker, Adam Deen, is an international public speaker on Muslim apologetics, a former Islam Channel presenter and Muslim philosopher who has been working in the field of Muslim apologetics for almost a decade. He has contributed to debates on issues ranging from religious philosophy and theology. His work draws on contemporary philosophy to defend Islam in debates. He has regularly appeared on mainstream TV as well. So, if you also want to find out some more information about Adam Deen, you can check out his website at www.adamdeen.com. So tonight's format. We will begin with a short recitation from the Quran. For those of you who are unaware, the Quran is the final testament in Islam, having been carefully preserved and memorized by millions of Muslims globally even today. Tonight, we will recite verses in the precise style and pronunciation that it was revealed in over 1,400 years ago. After this, we will invite Adam Deen to the platform to speak for approximately 40 minutes. Then we will open the platform to you, the audience, and begin an interactive question and answer session. So we aim to finish tonight at approximately 8 p.m. and we will endeavour to answer as many questions as possible in the time permitted. Now let's all give a very warm welcome for Adam Deen. Thank you.
I'd like to begin by thanking the Islamic Society at Surrey University for inviting me. It's a great pleasure to be here once again. Now, what I want to discuss this evening is something that touches us all. It transcends culture, location, gender, and whether we want to consider it or not. The most fundamental question in philosophy is to question our existence. What's the point of it all? Imagine you were walking through the woods somewhere in Surrey, and you were knocked unconscious, and you found yourself. You awoke and found yourself in some foreign piece of land, in the middle of a desert, let's say. What would be the first questions that you would ask yourself? Where am I? What am I doing here? Who got me here? Now, those questions are important to the one who is lost. But if we fail to answer those questions about our own existence, we will be eternally lost. I, for one, don't believe that we're cosmic orphans and that we are, in fact, lost. But our lives have meaning and purpose. Meaning and purpose. And those questions of identity, who am I, what am I doing here, what's the point of it all, can simply be answered by a formula: I am Muslim. But before I expand upon this, what about if I don't believe in God? Can I have meaning and purpose? Does life make sense without meaning and purpose? Can I just live my life without even considering meaning and purpose in my life? Can man live without God? Carl Sagan, a noted atheist astronomer, in the book pale blue dot, Carl Sagan concentrates on an image taken 4 billion miles away by the Voyager spacecraft. And he says this: because of the reflection of the sunlight, the Earth seems to be sitting in a beam of light, as if there were some special significance in this small world. But it's just an accident of geometry and optics. Our imagined self-importance, the delusion of some prevailed position in the universe, are challenged by this point of pale light. Our planet is a lonely speck in the great and developing cosmic dark. In our obscurity, in all its vastness, there is no hint that help will come from elsewhere to save us from ourselves. He also says, who are we? We find that we live in an insignificant planet on a humdrum star lost in a galaxy tucked away in some forgotten corner of the universe, in which there are far more galaxies than people. Stephen Hawking has also described man as being a chemical scum on a moderate-sized planet. This insignificant chemical scum resides in a universe that is forever expanding, and as it continues to expand, it moves further and further apart. And as it does so, it becomes colder and colder as the energy is used up. All the stars will die. All matter will collapse into dead stars and black holes. There will be no life. There will be no light and no heat. There will be no humanity. What kind of meaning can we conjure up? What kind of notion can we hope to have in a horrific scenario such as this? Not only each and every one of us here will pass out of existence, but the entire human race is destined for destruction, doomed to destruction. Now, some of us may say that, yes, but I have importance relative to certain events in my life. I am important in my life. But all I will say to this is this: what kind of significance can that bring about when all that we have is a destruction of mankind? Does it really matter? Does it really matter whether you exist or not exist? Does it really matter that you're here and you contribute to anything, have an impact on anything? Whether it's the dedication of one's life to charity, the contributions to science, the research of the doctor to alleviate pain and suffering, the efforts to secure peace in the world, sacrifices for others, the conquering of lands, the building of illustrious and magnificent buildings, writing a bestseller, to establish a family, to accumulate a fortune, to strive for further progress and prosperity, the long hours of study, our jobs, our friendships. In a final analysis, all of this is utterly meaningless. We attach meaning to these things in hope that we transcend death by participating in something worth lasting. But in the end, it will all amount to nothing, absolutely nothing. Because our lives are ultimately meaningless, therefore whatever we fill our lives with, it will be meaningless. What about the greats of the Enlightenment? What about the great atheist thinkers of our time in the previous century? The champions of living a life without God. What did they see when they looked at the world? Voltaire, he saw this. He said, I saw a worm crawling on the earth, and the bird going and destroying the worm and consuming it. Then he saw the eagle coming and destroying that bird. Then he saw a human being take his gun and shoot the eagle apart, and then the human being meets his fellow human being on the battlefield and killing one another. And that worm enters a human being's body and devours it. He says the miseries of each are supposed to make up the good of all. Voltaire is capturing the unshakable meaningless of our lives. The atheist philosopher Bertrand Russell laminated. He said that man is a product of causes which had no provision of end they were achieving. That his origin, his growth, his hopes, his fears, his love, his beliefs are but the outcomes of accidental co-locations of atoms. That no fire, no heroism, no intensity of thought and feeling can preserve the individual life beyond the grave. That all the labours of all the ages, all the devotion, all the inspiration, all the noonday brightness of human genius are destined to destruction in the vast death of the solar system, and that the whole temple of man's achievement must inevitably be buried beneath the debris of the universe in ruins. All these things, if not quite beyond dispute, are yet so nearly certain that no philosophy which rejects them can hope to stand. Only within the scaffolding of these truths, only on the firm foundation of unyielding despair, can the soul's habitation henceforth be safely built. Bertrand Russell wants us to embrace this depressing depiction of man. Now, some of us may feel uncomfortable with this depiction, this picture that's painted before us. It is uncomfortable, it is frightening, but it is consistent, my friends. Think of it like this. There are computer games where we can build virtual lives. We can have friendships. We can build families. We can get jobs, accumulate a wealth. We can become kings and queens and rule armies and empires and conquer other civilizations. But when we turn the power off, does any of those days, nights, months of gameplay, does it amount to anything at all? Absolutely not. In the same way, when we play the game of life, and day in, day out, we fill out the motions of life 24/7, and then it's game over, and we pass away, does it amount to anything whatsoever? Absolutely not. Absolutely not. No meaning whatsoever. It amounts to nothing whatsoever. Man is like a criminal sentenced to death, killing time before his sentence date. That's all that we are without God. It does not make a difference whether you exist or you don't exist, or whether you existed at all. Absolutely no difference whatsoever. What about purpose? Does man have purpose without God? Without God, the universe is nothing more than a cosmic accident, a graveyard of matter. Then what of man? What is man? Man is nothing more than a freak of nature. A freak of nature. He has no goal. A journey without a destination. No goal, no purpose. So then, is it all for nothing? Is it absolutely nothing? There's no reason why we're here. Absolutely no purpose, no reason. Well, listen to Stephen Jay Gould, the paleontologist from Harvard, a confessed anti-theist. Listen to what he says. We are here because one odd group of fishes had a peculiar fin anatomy that could transform into legs for terrestrial creatures. Because comets struck the Earth and wiped out dinosaurs, thereby giving mammals a chance not to otherwise available. So thank your lucky stars in a literal sense, because the Earth never froze over entirely during an ice age, because a small and tenuous species arising in Africa 250,000 years ago has managed so far to survive by hook and by crook. We yearn for higher answer, but none exists. Man is nothing but a byproduct of a lengthy evolutionary process. He's an accident, a product of chance, absolute chance. Man is nothing but, and only can be viewed as, a product of chance, some matter, and some time. Qualitatively, you have as much purpose in your lives as much as a rat's life. Indeed, the French atheist existentialist philosopher Camus, confronted with the absurdity of life, where there was a mismatch of what human beings need and the reality that was faced in front of him. He said this: there is but one true serious philosophical question, and that is suicide. Judging whether life is or is not worth living amounts to the most important fundamental question in philosophy. Shall we even continue to live once we're confronted with the absurdity of life? How then does modern man continue? How does he cope with the absurdity of life? Can he just ignore it? Can he just ignore a life without any meaning or purpose? About 20 years ago, there was an article in Psychology Today by Martin Seligman, who is from the University of Pennsylvania. And what he did was to analyze the baby boomer generation, the 1960s generation, and he compared it to 3 generations before it. And Sagan had discovered that there was a not 5, not 6, not 7, but a 10-fold increase in the number of people suffering from depression. So there was a 10-fold increase in that single generation span, more than any other generation in the history of America. And Sagan says that if there was a 10-fold increase in heart disease, it would be considered an epidemic. And he says we're well within our rights to say that this was an epidemic of depression. But then he asked the important question, why? Why was there this increase of depression? And his answers were staggering. The reason that there was this increase was because that people in that generation had lost the art of relating their day-to-day lives for something beyond that life. They somehow lost the ideal, the view that their lives were in actual fact true and genuine. They lost the concern of relating their day-to-day lives to a larger purpose, a larger cause, because they believe now that there was no larger cause, there was no greater purpose. And what did they do? They started to create meaning for themselves. In the words of Sagan, they became narcissistic. And Sagan says, anyone who turns to simply creating meaning for themselves is going to end up a very, very, very depressed person. So this question of meaning and purpose simply won't go away. It will haunt us, whether you think that it has no answer, whether you think in principle it has no answer, or you think that you should just ignore it and carry on. It will haunt us, whether we like it or not. The lack of meaning and purpose in our lives is absolutely inescapable. So in that case, we can't ignore this question. We can't ignore the meaning and purpose, the lack of it in our lives. So then how does he cope? How does modern man cope? You have to appreciate the fact that this is very, very new. This problem is relatively new to the history of mankind. This is what we could describe as a blip in the history of man. Modern man's dilemma of living without any meaning and purpose is very, very new. Because people have always believed in God in some manner or form. They have always had a religion. But then came, for example, up until the 15th century, it was culturally and intellectually inconceivable not to believe in God. God defined all aspects of reality. When man looked at the world and wanted to find a solution to a problem, God was in the background. God was axiomatic to one's understanding of the world. But then came the Enlightenment. Man felt repressed by God, repressed by religion. He felt choked. He wanted to be alone. He wanted to rid the shackles of religion and God from his life. He did so. And then he became alone. He became alone. So then he had to develop techniques to silence the yearning for something more, something more than this world. But despite the attempts to do away, despite the attempts to explain away the yearnings for the heart for something beyond this world, the transcendence is inescapable. If you're going to take something from this lecture, I would like you to take this point. That if you do not have God in your lives, something else will fill that void and take its position. It is a fact. For some people, materialism is a form of spirituality. We no longer worship in the temple, in the synagogue, in the church or the mosque, but we worship in the mall. Some of us celebrate ceremonies of consumerism, consumption. Some people refer to as Christmas. Armed with our talisman, the credit card, we feel happy again. Why? Because we bought more stuff and we have authenticated our own existence. We have authenticated our own existence. This is why the advertising agencies know how to manipulate us. They know exactly that when we buy things, we're not buying things. We're buying meanings attached to those things. And by using powerful branding techniques, fashion and the like, advertising, messaging, they attach arbitrarily meanings and emotions to these products to manipulate us. Buy this and become happy. Buy this and become great. Buy this and we will love you. Roger Rosenblatt, in the book Consuming Desires, captures this precisely. He says, to have and not have, that is the essence of consumerism in America, and the engine of Western capitalism. To experience a moment when acquisition of stuff brings you an epiphany of sobbing, because its very being and the act of acquiring itself reminds you of the stuff you do not have, or do not have yet. The thrill of the present drags you into the want of the past, and then propels you into prayers of the future. The stuff is there and not there. Not bad for a sociologist. What is he doing here? He puts it in a comedic sense, but he captures the religiosity of consumerism. And this is how we cope in a world without God. We fall prey to the consumer lie, a pseudo-salvation. But my friends, we all know here, deep down, that this won't do. That consumerism won't make us happy. Materialism will not make us happy. It's not enough. How many of us here have been in that situation where we desired the latest product? Whether it's the iPad, iPhone. I just got one, by the way. Still trying to work out how to use it, but still got one. Whether it's the new car, or whether it's a new designer handbag. My wife has a problem with handbags. You know, now and then she'll say, honey, I found this new bag. And I look at her and I say, but we have 3. And she just looks at me confused, like, what's that got to do with it? All the ladies know what I'm talking about here. And those that aren't married, prepare for it. I guess we all have our vices. But whatever it may be, that when you attain this product, as soon as you have that product, what happens? The desire withers away. The novelty is worn off, completely worn off. Why? Because material things are temporal. Stuff is hyped. Once you've had one thing, you've had them all. And this kind of moral lesson here reminds me of a film that I watched many years ago called Scarface. Show of hands who's actually seen this film? Okay. All the guys have. The girls are like, Scarface? Is it about plastic surgery? But for those that haven't seen the film, many people think that the climax of that film is the end, where Tony Montana, played by Al Pacino, he gets his gun and says, say hello to my little friend, and starts machining gun everybody. But that's not the climax of the film. The climax of that film is halfway through it. And just to give you a background, so we have this chap, Tony Montana, from Puerto Rico, I think, if my memory does not fail me, and he's at the immigration point. And he wants to break into America, make a life for himself, a living for himself. So he's at that point where he's trying to convince the chaps to let him through. He says, look, I'm really poor, I've been poor all my life. I've been eating squid all my life, I'm fed up of squid. Let me in, let me make a life for myself. So they feel sorry for him and they let him in. So he gets a job, I think it's just washing plates or something in the kitchen, and then he starts getting into a life of crime. So he starts working in the streets, he gets involved with the drug world. And he starts working in the streets and he builds a name for himself. And the big boss, the mafia boss at that time, takes him under his wing and thinks that he has potential. So he becomes really well known for his gangster life. He becomes number 2. But then not too long after that, he becomes number 1. To the point where he kills his actual boss. And he actually marries the boss's widow, who he has loved from day one and adored, and worshipped the ground she walked on. So what happens then? He becomes the head mafia boss, the number 1 head honcho in town, boss number 1. So now he has riches beyond his wildest dreams, the power like he could never have imagined, from cleaning plates to becoming number 1 in that city. So he's halfway through the film, he's in this plush restaurant where the waiter's wearing tuxedos. And he's sitting on that table with his friend opposite him and the woman beside him, the woman that he married, that he have always wanted. And he sits there. And he has everything now. And he has a cigar. And he says, "Is this it?" He says, "Is this it?" What it was made out to be was not what it turned out to be. Oscar Wilde said, there are 2 tragedies in one's life. Not getting what you want, and the other one is getting it. Libraries are full of testimonies, confession stories of people who thought that having it all was not all. We know that stuff is clearly hyped. We all know deep down that it's not going to make us happy. Pinning our hopes in the material world, it's like pinning our hopes in nothingness. That pin will just drop. And that is why God in the Quran, Allah in the Quran, He says, "For the life of this world is nothing but an enjoyment of self-delusion." To think that we can be happy purely of this world is just fooling ourselves. There is nothing in this world will quench the desire for transcendence. Absolutely not. Psychologists and sociologists are discovering the pain of boredom in our lives. We have so much access at our disposal to entertain us and to make us happy, and yet it is still not enough. More than any other generation, and yet we are still bored. Not enough violence, not enough drugs, not enough sex. What is this notion that we hear from polemical atheists that somehow religion is the cause of all violence in the world that we've seen? What rubbish is that? In an era of secularism where God has been kicked out and religion has no place, we are obsessed with violence. We have children, literally children, playing computer games where the objective of the game is to indiscriminately kill people, to beat up prostitutes and take their money and do what you want with them. And then we scratch our heads and think, why is there so much violence in the world with our youth? Maybe that's got something to do with it. We hear stories of people ordering pizzas and then shooting the pizza delivery man just to see what it would be like. Without God and religion, violence is alive and kicking in our lives. I have 2 police officers in the audience and probably confirm what I'm saying here. Not enough sex in our lives. We have perversions that go beyond human comprehension. Don't let me get started. I don't want to lower the tone of this evening. That lose all sense of the meaning of the word sex. Just go on the internet and look at perversions. You think to yourself, where did I start? Not enough drugs in our life. Man in an era of boredom, an era without transcendence, wants to take cocktails of drugs, trance-induced music, rave parties, and it's considered a new culture. This is not culture. This is escapism. This is counter-reality. Man can't bear to live this world anymore, and yet he seeks to escape it. This is not culture. This is counter-reality. people are so dead spiritually and emotionally. So dead. That what we do is we seek the extremes. The extremes of living. Why? Because we are so dead inside that we have lost touch with the nature of existence. And we want something to activate it, awaken within us. And that is why we seek those extremes in sex and violence and drugs. The Prophet, peace be upon him, he said the difference between the one who remembers God and does not remember God is the difference between the living and the dead. The living and the dead. So this, my friends, this alternative religion of materialism simply won't do. People want more than this. Man needs a narrative. Even if he denies God, man needs a narrative. We need a journey. We need a story. We need someone to guide us. And if we kick God out, then we will invent one in its place. We will invent a narrative. We know that consumerism has failed because when we look at the world, we see people have an interest in spirituality. We have these cults and New Age religions and Scientology popping up. Why? Because in a secular age, these work as patchwork systems to fill the void of spirituality in our lives. Man can't just live on bread and water. He needs something more. Go to the bookstores. Books on New Age religions, crystals, tarot cards, retreats away to find oneself, to become enlightened. It's all the rage. Paganism is back. And what an intellectual tragedy. We have the mercy, the enlightenment of a monotheistic religion. Tawheed, as it's called in Arabic. And what do? We kick God out and we'd have a full reversal back to paganism. Back to paganism. But my friends, will this work? To reinvent a narrative for ourselves, will this work? Absolutely not. Absolutely not. To invent meaning is an enterprise of self-delusion. It's an enterprise of delusion. If the world, if our lives have no meaning and purpose, and to simply attach meaning to it arbitrarily, is a life of fooling ourselves. Daniel J. Levinson, in The Seasons of Man's Life, he says, as he attempts to reappraise his life, a man discovers how much is based on illusion, and he is faced with the task of disillusionment. By this expression, I mean a reduction of illusions and recognition that long-held assumptions and beliefs about self and the world are not true. This process merits special attention because illusion plays so vital a role in our lives throughout the life cycle. If you recall, I mentioned a quote from Bertrand Russell. And he thought he had the answer. Listen to what he says. What he thought to be good news turned out not to be so bright. Listen to what he wrote. I wrote with a passion and force because I really thought I had a gospel. Now I'm cynical about the gospel because it won't stand the test of life. This is a man who dedicated his life to what he thought was the answer, a life without God. And then he found out that it wasn't right. Many atheists will refer to his earlier writings, but they will ignore the later writings. I wonder why. So whether it's the consumerism lie, whether it's the attempt to reinvent a narrative for ourselves, whether it's these New Age religions, it simply won't do. One cannot escape the absurdity of life without God. But then what is the remedy? Depravity haunts us. How does man get out of this position that he has created? This abyss of depravity. How? Well, if you recall in my earlier part of my speech, I said there is a simple formula. I am Muslim. Now, this formula answers those questions about identity. Who am I? What am I doing here? What's the point of it all? That formula provides me meaning and purpose in my life. The universe is not an accident. It was meant to be. The universe is a product of a transcendent cause. A transcendent will that is meant to be. You are not an accident. You are supposed to be here. Your lives have significance. You're not just a chemical scum, as Stephen Hawking puts it. What defines you is not the physical, but your soul. That is what defines you. There was a moment where all the souls were in an audience of God. All the people that lived, all the people that are living now in this time, and all the people that will come to live, they were in an audience of God. And God asked every one of those souls. He said, "Who is your Lord?" And without hesitation, every single one of us replied, "You are. You are my Lord." Even Richard Dawkins. And the reason that you have a yearning for transcendence, the reason that you have this, is because your soul recalls that momentous day, that moment when your Lord asked you, "Who is your Lord?" That is why nothing else will fill that void. There are dimensions to our experience that can only be filled and answered existentially in a relationship with God. There's no other way. Your makeup is not of earth, but it is of the heavens. All of us here are linked to that sacred moment where God bestows upon Adam, the first man, sacredness and divineness. We are all part of that magic moment. And that's why it does matter whether you live or do not live. It does matter whether you exist or do not exist, because your life has meaning. What about purpose? Of course, we have purpose. In the Quran, God, Allah, uses the word Khalif, vicegerent, a representative. You are here to live by that Lord, of the attributes that Lord is. Merciful, kind, compassionate, just. You are counted to live your life according to those attributes of God. Life does not end at the grave. No. Rumi said that death for the Muslim is like a bird being freed from a cage. Death is not the end, it is the beginning. And the decisions that you make in this life have eternal significance. So you have purpose. But not only do you just have meaning and purpose, but it is grounded in the intellect. The Quran, over and over again, speaks of evidence, reason, ponder, reflection, falsification. Falsification tests that have stood the test of time. The Quran teases and agitates the rational faculty of the reader. So not only I have meaning and purpose, but it is actually real. Now, whether you agree with what I've said this evening, there is one thing that none of us can deny. That is that one day we will not be here. We will pass away from existence, that we will die. That we won't be here, that you won't be able to see. You won't be able to touch, smell, any of those things. That all that you will be is a memory in the people that are already here. The greatest regret is a regret that you will have after you die. We all know what regret feels like. It haunts us. We wish we would have done X, Y, and Z. And the most troubling regret is the one that you will face when you die. I want to end with an extract from The Death of Ivan Ilyich. It is a novel that speaks of a man in 19th century Russia who's a high court judge who has this realization that he is mortal on his deathbed. It says, it occurred to him that what had appeared perfectly impossible before, namely that he had not spent his life as he should have done, might after all be true. It occurred to him that his scarcely perceptible attempts to struggle against what was considered good by the most highly placed people, those scarcely noticeable impulses which he had immediately suppressed, might have been real, might have been the real thing, and all the rest false. And his professional duties, and the whole arrangement of his life, of his family, and all his social and official interests might all have been false. He tried to defend all those things to himself, and suddenly felt weakness of what he was defending. There was nothing to defend. But if that is so, he said to himself, and I am leaving this life with the consciousness that I have lost all that was given to me, and it is impossible to rectify it, what then? He lay on his back and began to pass his life in review in quite a new way. In the morning, when he saw his footman, then his wife, then his daughter, and then the doctor, their every word and movement confirmed to him the awful truth that had been revealed to him during that night. In them he saw himself, all that for which he had lived, and saw clearly that it was not real at all, but a terrible and huge deception which had hidden both life and death. This consciousness intensified his physical suffering tenfold. He groaned and tossed about and pulled up at his clothing which choked him and stifled him, and he hated them on that account. I wouldn't want anybody to have that rude awakening on their deathbed. So I end on that thought, that please consider meaning and purpose in your lives and the question of Islam. Thank you for listening.